Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in. This is how the human mind works. When you're walking through a forest, you don't think too much. You just let the silence surround you. Feel the soft breeze and the branches crack under your feet. It's in our nature to yearn for such scenery. No matter how much we thrive in busy, concrete-soaked cities, forests are always welcoming and refreshing to us. The air is clear and crisp, and daylight plays hide-and-seek through the tall branches. It's inspiring and beautiful. Sometimes, though, as you walk on your path, your mind begins to focus on small things, noises, gusts of wind, shadows in the trees. Such silence can be both welcoming and unsettling, depends on how you view it. Forests are double-sided coins. They hide you away from the tiring city landscape, but expose you to another environment. You're not in control anymore, because this is not your home. You can lie to yourself and build a house there, but you don't belong in a forest. You're merely a visitor. That's national parks for you. An illusion of being in control. The fake freedom you feel when you walk on those marked paths and camp in the square assigned to you. When you think the silence around you is peaceful, but even the silence is an illusion. Visit a forest again, even when it's silent, is it really? It's not. Complete absolute silence means death. Fear it. My father taught me that. He's a park ranger and he's been doing this job since forever. I wasn't much of a fan of national parks, especially because most of the time there's no service and the hikes are killing me. I'd rather enjoy nature by swimming in a lake or skiing. Why break your legs to end up to a high point just to see a random valley? Not to mention the animals. They were everywhere, and the insects always got on my nerves. I never understood his love for the forest. I guess that was one of the reasons why he started telling me scary stories from his night shift. Looking back, they were obviously made up, but to younger me, they seemed believable. I used to think he was so brave for working the night shift. As I got older, I got into horror, and even if I didn't believe in his forest creatures anymore, I still liked the idea of spending the night in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, just for that dose of adrenaline. When my father said he wanted to take me with him, I accepted immediately. I knew why he offered. See, over the past years, our relationship had taken a big hit. I guess I was growing up and he didn't know how to handle that. He'd become emotionally distant and seemed to repel any of my tries to open up to him. In return, I'd become uninterested and irritable. In the words of my mother, this would have been a fun way to bond, I guess. We arrived at the park around 9 p.m. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. His Jeep pierced through the darkness and ventured into the woods. The headlights flashed the trees, turning them white against the black sky. I'd never been on this route, but again, my visits to the park were rare. We drove for a while. Most of the time, people underestimate the size of national parks. It took us an hour and a half to get to the cabin, which wasn't even in the heart of the forest. I saw it one single trace of humanity in the middle of nowhere. A tiny wooden cabin with flickering light bulbs and watchdogs. Before we got out of the car, my father stopped me. Listen, there's some instructions you need to follow here. I know it might seem unimportant, but they're crucial. Then he handed me a piece of paper, a list of handwritten rules. At first, they were ordinary. Don't go out alone in the park, don't leave food out, etc. I thought the rest of the rules had been put there just to freak me out. Dad, I'm not 12 anymore. You can't freak me out with this shit. I'm not trying to. You wanted to come here with me, so act accordingly. What even is this? If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. We have all kinds of weirdos around here. And this? If the whistling is near you, it means they're far? My father smiled, but his eyes didn't. Some of these are added by superstitious fellas. It's more of a what if. It's not going to happen to you. Don't go out alone in the park. Always have a working contact device. Don't leave marked paths, unless instructed to and or with proper equipment. Don't leave food out, and lock the trash bins. Always keep on the whistle and the badge. If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. Your family is not in here. Remember, there is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. Lock your car doors, even when you are driving. Check the marks on the trees. There's only 3 types of marks, all triangles: red, yellow, and green. Other marks are not ours. Don't follow them. If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. If it's far away, it means they're near. Beware of dead blue. What is dead blue? I asked. My father sighed. You know when you're out in the woods, when you think what you hear is silence, but you realize there's dozens of sounds around you, from birds to crickets to leaves rustling? Yeah, that's because there's no such thing as silence. Absolute silence, never. There's always sound, movement, life. Dead blue is complete and utter silence. That's our, code name for it. Death-inducing silence, unnatural. Right, and when that happens, when it won't. But if it does, he paused, staring at the steering wheel. Then his head turned to me. His eyes darted from mine to the window behind me. You leave. That being said, he got out of the car and I followed. The cabin was dusty and cramped. I couldn't understand how he could spend 8 hours in here. He had a small TV, but it wasn't working. A desk and a mini fridge. You sit here all alone? I asked. Yeah, why, that freak you out? Don't you get bored? Martin's post is 10 minutes away. Sometimes I just drive over. Nothing really happens out here anyway. My spot is pretty far from the campsites. I just have to patrol from time to time to make sure no one wanders off into the night, but that rarely happens. This is one of the wilder areas, less explored. You haven't explored it all? His eyes sparkled. Wouldn't be possible. So you don't know what's out there? That's the fun of it. You said you wanted adrenaline. There you go, I nodded. He opened the mini fridge and threw me some juice. Orange juice. I'd mentioned I liked this brand once and he'd remembered. Maybe our relationship wasn't so bad. We sat next to each other in the small cabin. Dad locked it. I'm not gonna lie to you, most of the time I just sleep. Literally nothing ever happens. So you really didn't see any creatures out there? Like the ones you told me about when I was little? I jokingly asked. The only creature out there is my manager, and I'd rather face 1,000,000 cryptids than talk to him. I laughed. I leaned in to look out the windows. I can't see anything, just my reflection. Want me to dim down the light? Yeah, he did, and darkness crept inside the tiny cabin. The woods became more prominent, more vivid. The light made by the moon was unbelievable, and the stars were actually visible compared to the polluted city. The cabin was on a hill, propped up a tree with a trapdoor and a ladder leading to our car. We could actually see above the tree line into the valley. We spent the first hours talking. Somewhere around midnight I began dozing off. I didn't want to, but I caved in and fell asleep with my head on the desk. He woke me up. I rubbed my eyes in confusion. What time is it? I got a call from Martin. Right, who was Martin? I mumbled. The other one in the area. He says he got a call from the campsite and someone's missing. We need to go search for him. We as in us? Yeah, you'll stay in the back seat. I'm on the phone with Martin right now. I could hear Martin's muffled voice through the speaker. Wait, don't take the kid. Why not? He'll stay in the car. Paul, it could be one of those nights. We won't get out of the car. You can't guarantee that. Well, I can't leave him here. Alone. In the dark. A pause followed. Look, Paul, I understand you wanted to do a take your kid to work day, but I don't know about this one. It could be dangerous. We're literally just going to drive around for a bit. It's fine. Leave him in the cabin. Dad put his hand over one of the speakers, so I didn't understand what Martin told him. His eyes kept darting to the window behind me. He sighed. Martin will come pick me up. You are staying here locked. Turn the lights off and wait for me to return. It's gonna take a minute and you'll be safe here. What? I'm not staying here alone. What did Martin tell you to change your mind? It doesn't matter. I'll return in maximum half an hour. You can go back to sleep if you want. Or I can call you and we can talk. I was afraid, truly afraid. I did not want to show it, especially after I'd complained that nothing interesting happened around there, so I reluctantly agreed. My dad opened the trapdoor and climbed down the ladder. Then his face disappeared into the darkness. I saw Martin's car pick him up and drive away. Silence followed. I wished I'd been home in my bed. Instead, I sat stiff on the chair and waited, and waited. I began imagining the worst. What if they'd crashed? What if a bear had found them? I didn't want to let my fear get the best of me, but I thought about his legends and the set of rules. I hoped the writers were just paranoid. At around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the trapdoor. I felt my chest tighten. Another knock followed. I wanted to respond, but something in me didn't allow me to. Then I heard my dad's voice. Kev, open. It's cold out here. It echoed through the cabin. My eyes were dry from the lack of sleep, but my mind was fully awake. I stared at the phone, then at the trapdoor. Kev, open please. I know you're there, I saw you at the window. I turned off the light completely. I don't know why I had this urge, but if my dad could see me from the window, anyone could. Or anything. And I didn't like to be on display like that. You don't have a key? It locks from the inside. Shit, yeah, how was it? Did you find him? Yeah, we did. He was drunk off his ass. We helped him return to his friends. Could have been a lot worse. As I was talking to him, I searched for the keys in the drawer. It was strange, because I hadn't heard anyone climbing the ladder, or seen Martin's car drive my dad back to the cabin. How did you get here without Martin? What do you mean? Open up, Kev, I'm freezing. Hey, answer the question. He did drive me here, didn't see any headlights. They were off to not draw the attention of animals. Bullshit. I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. Your family is not in here. Remember, there is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely grab the phone. I skimmed through my contacts. Kate F. Connor, Dad, I called him. The phone was ringing, yet no sound came from beneath the trapdoor. My dad picked up. Anything okay? In the blinding darkness of the cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, I toned my voice down to a whisper. Dad, someone out there is pretending to be you. A long pause followed. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. Don't open. Turn off the lights. Did you turn them off when I told you? I turned them off now. No, you should have turned them off when I left, and I'm sorry. It's fine. Don't talk to it. Did you talk to it? Guilt crept up my spine. I don't know why, but I lied. I did not. Good. Stay put. I'm coming after you. But what if the thing sees you? You'll have to face it. We have ways to distract them. It's fine. Don't be scared, I lied again. I'm not. Good, I love you. I'm coming. I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for him. The voice from below continued. Kev, please open, please. It's cold. I didn't answer. Knocks followed. The voice went on. Did you talk to someone on the phone? Kev, I lost my phone in the woods. Whoever is out there and has my phone is not me. It's not me. It's not me. It kept repeating, it's not me, it's not me. I began feeling lightheaded. Fear is one thing, but this was a combination of anxiety, stress, and guilt. I tried to control my breaths, but to no avail. The cabin was spinning around me. It's not me, 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 it's not me. Shut up. Shut up, and it did. Silence followed. I pulled out the list again and started reading and rereading the rules like a lunatic. I kept listening for noises from outside. The wind was still going. Good. No dead blue. Then I heard a loud thud from my wall. Another followed, and another. It sounded like footsteps. They moved to the roof of the cabin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Whatever was out there was now climbing around my cabin. I could hear the scratching outside. I started to cry and covered my mouth with my hand. I just wanted my dad. I wished I could see his face again. The universe somehow ironically responded, because my dad's face suddenly appeared at one of the windows. He raised his hand and knocked. I stared at him through my eyebrows, my head tilted. Scarcely breathing, I remained still. He kept knocking. That wasn't my dad. The cabin was tied to a tree, at around 10 meters from the ground. He could not be at the window. The creature knocked, and for what seemed like an eternity, we just made eye contact. Blood was dripping from one of its nostrils. Another phone call woke me from my trance. Kevin, are you there? Are you in the cabin? Yes, and the thing looks like you. And it's at the window. I'm coming right now. I'll shoot it. Don't worry. I'm just about to turn a corner. Dad, I'm really scared for you. Martin's coming too. It's okay. Truly, in a few minutes, Martin's car pulled up. I cried in relief. The thing turned its head to look, then back to me. It opened its mouth wide and, using its fingers, pulled the corners upwards to form a smile, then jumped into the woods, into the darkness. Gunshots followed. After a few silent minutes, I called my dad. He picked up. Where are you? I asked. I'm coming to get you. I saw him walk towards the cabin, then heard him climb up the stairs. I unlocked the trapdoor and hugged him tight. What was that? Please tell me we're going home. We are. I'm so sorry. I should have never put you through this. Come on. As we walked towards our car, my blood ran cold. It was not something I'd seen or heard, but the opposite. See, the wind had stopped. The crickets had stopped. dead blue. I sprinted to the car, got into the driver's seat, then locked the doors. My dad was standing in front of the car, confused. That's when I got a text and I hit the gas. I ran him over, then turned the car around and sped up into the night. I barely knew how to work it out since I didn't have my license, but I left as quick as possible. Behind me, a car followed. When I got to the nearest checkpoint, I stopped. The car was Martin's. He got out alone. "Where's my dad?" I asked. "He took an ATV to get you. Said he'd get there faster. I texted him to turn around and that you were safe." The text he'd sent me. "Martin and I split up. He may get there faster than me, and if he does, he'll text me to turn and head to the checkpoint. There is no one with Martin. He's alone." I thought I'd unlocked the trap door to my dad, when he'd actually taken an ATV and turned to the checkpoint. The thing I'd ran over wasn't my dad, and I'd known it since I felt that unnerving silence. However, no one at the checkpoint had seen my father. As I'm typing this, I'm afraid for him, but a part of me knows he's alive. Maybe he took another route or got lost. Whatever he did, I'll find him. It was one of those late nights on the job, but that didn't bother me at all. In fact, it was one of my favorite parts of being a park ranger, hanging around late at night with just a few of my fellow rangers in the middle of the woods. It was just like huddling around a campfire while you told stories, except we were indoors around a fireplace. It was the middle of spring, but it had been cold lately, so while the afternoons were pleasant, the nights had been chilly, which was why we were all inside gathered around a fire while on the clock. The ranger station was beyond comfortable with a fire, so I was contently sitting in one of the many leather couches facing it. We were all midway through a shift, and like many nights on the job, it was quiet, so we got to talking about nothing in particular. There's nothing like the natural flow of an unplanned conversation. Outside, the evening had slowly given way to night, and the darkness had settled upon the woods with its usual silent thoroughness. The area may be a park during the day, but at night it was the woods. Parks inherently sound fun and brings to mind cookouts, whereas the woods has an inherently spooky vibe. There were 4 of us sitting by the fire in the ranger station on that chilly night. Me, Harland, Anthony, and Craig. Craig had just finished talking about his cousin's wedding when Anthony asked Harland what his scariest story was from working here all these years. Usually, Harland just chuckled and said he'd heard some crazy things over the years. But not this time. This time he sat there quietly for a moment before he said, "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek." That was when we all went completely still. If we were just like people huddled around a campfire, Harland was the one in charge of building the fire. He was the ranger we always deferred to. He'd been on the job long enough to have earned that right. Harland's family had also been in the area for generations, so if anyone had any stories to tell about what may have happened here, it was him. Plus, he was a terrific guy, hardworking and beyond helpful when you needed something. So when someone like Harland tells you he's heard of a story like that, you listen intently, especially with the tone of voice he used, serious and no nonsense without a trace of amusement. "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek," Harland began in a clear voice as we all gave him our full attention. The story was first told to me by my Uncle George, who had been a lumberjack for years. According to him, people said there was a curse on the land which was placed there by a witch. It all started one year when the harvest went bad. Since there had been nothing but plentiful harvests every year, it made people beyond suspicious. There was barely enough grain and stuff to get through winter. It didn't help matters that the town had generally been prosperous but had recently started to go through some financial difficulties. Then, numerous bits of misfortune happened within the community over the years. Houses burning down, people going missing and never being found again. Periodically, there would be something odd left lying around near where someone had vanished. Creepy things like weird-looking dolls made from wood that never failed to rattle people. There wasn't anyone around who people thought was capable of anything like this. And since one of the families in town had experienced something like this before in a different town many years ago, they suspected there was some kind of curse put on them, especially after a few people who kept track of all the strange events realized all of them took place on a full moon. Harland took a sip of his coffee before he continued. It all came to a head when there was a terrible accident at the town lumber mill. A fire that no one could figure out how it started. Several employees died and many others were badly injured, and the lumber mill, which was one of the biggest employers around, closed. That was when the paranoia that had been lingering under the surface boiled over, So when some people from town found an abandoned cottage in the woods near Blackthorn Creek, with weird symbols written on the walls and the floor, they grabbed their torches, set the place on fire, and watched it burn. According to the crowd, the cabin took forever to burn, much longer than the people thought possible. But once it did finally burn down, they took the ashes and buried them deep in the woods and didn't mark the location, hoping that would be the end of it. And for a while, that seemed to be the case. But every once in a while, something would happen that would make people in town look over their shoulders. Nothing major. A bit of bad luck in the form of an injury, or some suspicious noises outside the house after dark, and perhaps some scratch marks on the door or the wall. But ever since then, people would be very careful what they did, especially if there was a full moon. Then he paused for a moment to look at the fire, which was crackling pleasantly in the fireplace. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I first heard the story, but I remember exactly how I felt. Confused. Because the story, although creepy and entertaining, didn't quite make sense to me. And I said something to Uncle George about that, and he laughed. Then he said he agreed that the story was long on atmosphere and short on believability. That's when he got serious. Told me that although the story was a bit of fiction, he never doubted that it came from somewhere, and there was indeed something going on out in the woods. Then he added that it didn't matter how old I was, where I was, who I was with, or what was going on. If I got a terrible feeling, I should listen to it. And I've listened to every feeling I've gotten since then. It's never served me wrong. He looked around at us, slowly taking us all in. I've never quite believed that story, but I will be the last person to deny that in all the years I've been out here, I've felt things on occasion, things that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And on even fewer occasions I've seen things, fleeting glances at things that I wasn't sure I saw. But there was one time when I not only felt something, I heard something. The air in the ranger station was completely still. I briefly glanced at my colleagues as Harlan said this, and they met my glance, and I could see they were just as gripped by the story as I was. It was about 30 years ago, Harlan explained. I was just starting out as a park ranger. This was back in the early 90s when technology and life in general was very different from today. I'd grown up out in nature, and I'd seen plenty of scary movies, and more importantly, I'd grown up hearing countless spooky stories about what may or may not have been lurking outside, so I wasn't exactly sheltered. But there are some things you're never truly prepared to experience. The fire in the fireplace popped in the grate, but we were so absorbed in Harlan's story we barely noticed. There was plenty of wood in the fire, so we didn't have to worry about that for a while. It was early November. Halloween had just ended, which made everyone sad because I remember that year was a particularly fun one. Darkness seemed to be arriving earlier and earlier, so I was barely halfway through my shift when the sun was going down. I remember it had been raining almost every day, so the days were all gray and cloudy, and the nights were damp with plenty of fog. But that particular morning was dry. All the leaves that had clung to the trees had been scattered by the winds and rain, so they lay there on the grass all damp and torn. My job on that particular day was to go around raking them up so they didn't completely cover the trails and paths that people walked on. The chill in the air was that chill only late fall can bring, the dampness that seems to soak into your skin and never let go. I had just finished one section of the park and was walking back to my truck when the rain started up again, and it did so with a fury. So I hustled it to the truck, got inside, and headed back to the ranger station where I planned to spend the rest of the evening. And since it was a quiet night at the ranger station, it looked like I would get what I wanted. I was used to working the late shift by myself as the night supervisor, so being alone didn't bother me. I'd always been a quiet type who liked to read a book, so it was an ideal situation for me, except for that night. Harlan took a deep breath before he continued. Because Halloween was over and the rain had been steady, the park hadn't received as many visitors as it usually had. But I was inside the ranger station, this ranger station in fact, which was just as cozy and warm as you see it now. Plus, now that I was done with my task, I was free to read a book. So I wasted no time in curling up by the fire with a paperback. I'd spent many a shift this way, and it was fine by me. I'd happily read a book on a nice day, but on a rainy day, nothing better. Eventually, I started to get hungry. Since I'd just brought a light snack but turned out to be craving something bigger, I decided to order pizza. There was a local joint that was only a few minutes away that often delivered out here back then, so I didn't hesitate to give them a call. I ordered a medium pizza with pepperoni, and as I hung up, the rain started to really pound heavily on the station roof. I knew from experience that the rain pounding on the station roof could truly be loud. It seemed to surround you from all sides. But by the time the headlights pulled into the driveway, the rain had faded to a slight drizzle. But I could see the grass leading up here was pretty well soaked, and there were numerous small puddles on both the grass and the road. The trees were swaying along with the winds, and the sky was getting darker by the minute as night was settling in. By now, the outdoor lights had started to switch on as the car from the pizza place pulled up in front of the station, its windshield wipers going back and forth as it stopped in front of the entrance. I stood in front of it under the part of the roof that kept me out of the rain. The driver, a young guy named Derek in his early 20s, got out of the driver's seat and grabbed the pizza from the passenger's side. Derek had delivered here before, and he'd always done a great job. We chit-chatted as I handed him the cash with a generous tip. Then Derek handed me the pizza and was just about to go back to his car before he stopped and stared at something behind me. He paused and said that it would probably sound crazy, but it looked like there was a woman lurking in the woods near the ranger station. We all sat there silently for a moment before Harlan continued. I remember just standing there when he told me. The words sounded almost foreign as Derek said them out loud. My first reaction was that it was impossible, but there was only one way to find out, so I turned behind me to look at where he was pointing. He took another sip of coffee. The cluster of trees he was pointing at was a dense area of tall pine trees. They've been long gone by now. But back then there wasn't much in the way of illumination out there. But even I could see there was nothing there. I stood there, the pizza still clutched in my hand as I waited for anything to happen. But nothing emerged from the woods. I was just about to turn back to Derek when I heard "Get out" from beside me in a hushed voice, clear as could be. I turned around immediately to look at Derek, and without saying a word, I knew he'd heard it too. But while it was creepy as could be, I didn't know for sure what it meant. It didn't come out as an ominous command, more like a warning. But I won't lie. Standing there outside, I'd never felt fear like that before. I'd been afraid before, and I'd been afraid after, but not like that. That fear was less like a feeling and more like a part of your body, like it's always there and only rarely are you truly aware of it. Sitting there watching Harlan, it was clear that although we were sitting there in the present, he had been immediately transported back to that cold November night. I couldn't have told you how much time passed. May have only been a minute or two. But despite the dwindling light, I thought I could see shapes moving far out in the woods, very far out. After a moment, you couldn't see anything at all. Then Harlan's voice became quieter. To this day, I have no idea why that sight filled me with so much fear, just like I also have no idea how I knew it was people. But I did, and I knew it was people, as in more than one, much more than one. But I had no idea exactly how many. Then, almost as if on cue, I heard the word "now," and it was all the motivation I needed to tell Derek we had to go. He didn't need to be told twice because we hopped in his car and got out of there as fast as we could. Didn't stop for about 20 miles and we were far away from the ranger station. By that point, the fear had slowly faded and I was starving. So we split the pizza while debating what to tell my superiors. I eventually decided to say that I was feeling really sick and went to see a doctor I knew. Harlan chuckled, but it didn't take long for me to realize my excuse for leaving would be completely forgotten. Because after I left, the ranger station had been broken into by a group of people. The security camera we had at the time saw all 6 of them, dressed from head to toe in black, break right through the front door. Just crashed right through it. Then minutes later, they came back out without taking anything and vanished into the trees. The cops thoroughly searched the area but found nothing. I found out when I called my superiors to tell them I had to leave because I was feeling horrible. From the time on the camera, they appeared to arrive within mere minutes after I left with Derek. We all exchanged a look as the fact that he really was talking about this ranger station dawned on us. Sitting across from us, Harlan didn't say anything, but I knew he could tell the 3 of us were seeing the ranger station like never before. The conclusion the cops reached, Harlan eventually said, is that it was a gang of professional criminals who saw the ranger station and decided to see what they could find. Since there was apparently nothing they could make use of, they split. And every year on that day since that happened, I've taken a single flower and left it by where Derek says he saw someone that night. I've never seen or heard that voice since that night, but on occasion, I've felt the presence of something or someone watching me, and not in an unpleasant way. But that's the thing about the woods. There's no telling what you may find in them. And if you're really paying attention, it's amazing what you can learn. Like I learned that November night all those years ago was a full moon. The clouds just happened to obscure it out here. It was close to 3 in the afternoon when the knock came on the door to the ranger station. I was mildly surprised to hear it, given that it was early January in the foothills of the Adirondacks and the temperature was hovering at a balmy 12 degrees, with wind chills driving it into the negatives with frustrating frequency. The wind had been howling against the isolated station since before sunrise that morning, and I wondered if I was going to need to deal with any damage to my little abode after the storm blew through. I'd been monitoring the forecast and weather radar all day, and it looked like I was in for quite the blizzard by the time evening rolled around. It had been snowing most of the day already, but so far it hadn't been very heavy. I expected that to change by nightfall, however, which in January was only in another couple hours. I didn't usually keep the front door to the ranger station locked, since it wasn't uncommon for hikers and campers to make a pit stop on their way up the trail to the observation areas, either to log their camping site for the night, or just in hopes of a nice hot cup of coffee before they continued on their hike. The door hadn't been latching correctly lately, though, and had the tendency to swing open when a strong gust caught it just right, so I'd been keeping it locked until I could repair it. The knocking was light, somehow hesitant and almost polite, if that makes any sense. It was so quiet that I almost didn't hear it over the whistling of the wind and creaking of the station. I'd been in the middle of composing an email request for a new generator, as mine had been acting up a bit lately, and had to pause my typing and listen intently to ensure I'd even heard it in the first place. When it came again, only a bit louder, I pushed back from my desk and took another sip from my steaming mug before walking over and opening the door. Outside stood 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in what looked like expensive and very new cold weather coats and snow pants, all looking very similar except for the various bright colors and all bearing the familiar North Face logo. Their anxious faces peeked out from within their drawn and cinched hoods, and I had to suppress a grin. They looked dressed to climb Everest, not hike the lower trails of the Adirondacks tourists. Probably European and probably their first time seeing this sort of weather, I thought. It was a fairly common occurrence. Folks from all over the world came to visit these mountains, looking to experience all the beautiful wilderness we had to offer. I wasn't unsympathetic. If you weren't used to the unpredictable climate here in the winter, it could quickly catch you by surprise and get dangerous very quickly. "Hi there," I said cheerfully, stepping back into the doorway and motioning them inside. "Come in out of the snow and warm up by the fire." The man who'd been knocking turned to his companions, said something in Spanish, and then turned back to me with a wide grin and nodded, stepping past me and into the warmth of the station. The rest followed quickly, anxious to get out of the chill wind that was blowing hard outside. As soon as they were all in, I closed the door again and locked it to make sure it didn't blow open. "Gracias, sir." "I am Martin," said the man, pulling back his hood and unzipping his quilted down coat. He gestured to the others in turn. "This is Lucas, Diego, Sofia, and Triana." I nodded my greeting to each. Martin continued with a smile. "It is very cold. We come to visit USA from Spain, to see your beautiful mountains and enjoy the lovely scenery." His accent was very heavy, but his English was far better than my Spanish, so I didn't have much room to criticize. "But it seems a storm is coming and we fear there will be too much snow." "Unfortunately, we are not so prepared for that." I nodded, patting him on the shoulder as I moved past him and opened the door leading to the shelter room, reaching in and turning on the lights. "That's certainly true, my friend. I'm afraid we're in for a bit of a blizzard this evening." "Bad time for a winter stroll through the mountains," I said. "Fortunately, we happen to have enough space for you and your friends to make yourself at home and wait out the storm. My name is Jackson Turner, Ranger. There's coffee over there on the table and bunks and a comfortable sitting area in here." When the group just stared at me blankly for a moment, I got the feeling I'd lost most of them somewhere along the way. Instead, I just offered the friendliest smile I had and gestured to the room. At that, they all grinned and nodded their thanks as they quickly shuffled past me, dropping their packs on various bunks and beginning to remove their cold weather gear. Made sure they all got something hot to drink, and that they understood they were welcome to stay until the weather had cleared before returning to my desk. They all seemed very pleasant and grateful for my assistance, and they drifted from my thoughts as I continued my administrative work. It was another hour before the second knocking rapped at the door, this one slow and oddly rhythmic, almost a staccato beat, somehow unsteady and not as tentative as my other guests had been. I sighed heavily and straightened, heading around the counter and back over to the door. I hadn't had any visitors to the ranger station in a week or more, and now they were pouring in like this was a Holiday Inn Express or something. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, putting on my official greeting smile once again. In the doorway, shoulders and hooded head covered in a layer of icy snow, was a man of roughly my height, about 6 foot or so. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed in fancy, color-coordinated cold weather gear, but instead wore a mismatched combination of clothes, like he had raided the bargain bin at a second-hand expedition store. His pants were a blue quilted nylon and looked more on the expensive side, even if they didn't exactly fit him very well. But his coat was fur-lined and looked like it was made of padded wool, layered over an old fleece jacket. His boots looked newer and not too warm, something more suited to a summer hike than a winter in the mountains, I thought. "Hey there," I said as warmly as I could, waving him inside. "Come on in out of the snow." He didn't say anything, but gave the slightest hint of a nod as he walked past me. The strong scent of musky body odor followed him, and I wondered if he was one of those reclusive hermits that I'd heard rumors of, living out here all by himself in some makeshift shack. I closed the door and locked it again, turning back to the man. He'd already taken note of the bunk room to the left, where the Spaniards were getting settled, and he headed on in and sat on one of the empty bunks in the back corner of the room. He didn't remove his coat or offer any greeting to the others, and I noted with some curiosity that he didn't have any sort of pack with him, which further made me wonder if he lived nearby in some off-grid cabin. I could see that the others were smiling and making pleasantries towards him, but he just sat there, dark eyes quietly watching the activity without a single word. There was the slightest hint of a smile upon his lips, incongruous and somehow unnerving. It only took them a few moments to abandon their attempts at including him in conversation and turn back to their own group, speaking quietly in Spanish amongst themselves. For a moment, I wondered if he might be in some sort of shock. The temperature was dropping pretty quickly outside, and it had already been too cold for some of the clothing he wore. I considered giving him a quick once-over to make sure he didn't have any frostbite or signs of hypothermia, but something about him told me he might not be so welcoming to my attention. I stood there in the doorway to the bunk room for a minute, looking over the scene. Something about the newcomer seemed off somehow. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the way he moved, his lack of communication, the way he was just sitting there perfectly still on the corner bunk, just seemed strange. There was something else too, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something that tickled the back of my consciousness, just out of reach, more an instinctive unease than coherent thought. I found myself hoping the man would spend a few minutes warming himself and then be on his way again. Turning my attention to the others, I realized that they must have found something odd with him as well, as they had all subconsciously clustered around the end of the table farthest from him, and were speaking more quietly than before. More subdued. I noticed them periodically casting quick, uncomfortable glances in his direction, but never for more than the briefest of moments, as if they were just reassuring themselves that he hadn't moved and was still sitting there. I also noticed curiously that none of them sat with their back to the man, likely also subconsciously. I was just about to walk over and talk to him, to shake the odd feeling away, when Martin appeared in front of me, his brow furrowed. "Sir, my friends and I are worried about the other campers," he said. This drew my attention. There weren't any campers registered to be out here today. Was the newcomer one of them? Maybe they were in trouble. "What campers?" I asked with a frown. He motioned vaguely to the north. We passed their campsite on our way to the observation point before the weather turned us back here. Maybe a half-kilometer up the trail, in a clearing beside a small brook. He cast a quick look over his shoulder at the stranger sitting in the corner. There it was again, I thought, that same unease. Martin continued. "There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. They had some of those cold weather tents set up and seemed to be well prepared for the storm, at least as far as we could tell. We stopped and warmed ourselves by their fire for a bit. They seemed very experienced and were not concerned about the cold, but I am no expert. Well, it sounds like they should be okay," I said with the best reassuring smile I could muster. "They should have checked in with me, but if they're as prepared as you think, I'm sure they'll be just fine. When the storm passes, I'll head up there and check on them." just to make sure. He flicked his eyes to the man again and then locked them with mine with a surprising intensity, like he was trying to tell me something with his gaze alone. He lowered his voice and said, "The campers, they were all wearing very good clothing. Sophia's brother is a climber in some very cold regions, and she recognized the camper's gear as similar to what he uses. Even better news. Then?" I started, but Martin cut me off. "Exactly like the pants that man is wearing now," he said quietly. I looked over at the man again, once again taking note of his hodgepodge combination of clothing. The gloves he still wore looked to be thin and ill-suited to the winter weather, but looked well-made and would have been fine for a mild autumn outing. He still hadn't moved or said anything, and his emotionless eyes drifted slowly across the Spaniards with what seemed to my growing paranoia like a hungry interest. It was almost like he was inventorying them, evaluating them somehow. Once again, that tickle in the back of my brain, telling me something was not quite right with the man. Something was just a little out of place, but I still couldn't figure it out. It set my teeth on edge. I looked back at Martin. "Are you sure?" He shrugged. "As sure as we can be. Sophia says she is certain, but the rest of us do not have the experience to recognize these details as well as her." "Was this man with them?" I asked, but I already knew the answer. Martin shook his head. "No, I have never seen him before now." He leaned in a little closer and lowered his voice. "This man, there is something," he said, trailing off, unable to find the right words. I nodded. "I know. I feel it too." I walked back to my desk and opened a drawer, retrieving the holstered handgun and attaching it to my belt. The spare magazine went into my pocket, and I grabbed my heavy jacket from a nearby hook and pulled my fur-lined hat over my ears. Martin followed me, watching with interest. I looked over his shoulder, making sure we were out of sight and earshot of the bunk room. "I'm going to check on the camp." "Have you ever handled a shotgun?" I asked. He nodded. "I hunt pheasant with my cousins every year. I'm a very good shot." "Good," I said. "That doorway beside my desk is my room. Right inside you'll find a 12-gauge pump, loaded but not chambered. If you need it." He just gave a silent duck of his head. "I should be back within the hour. I know the place you're talking about. Keep him here until I return, but don't do anything if you don't have to," I said, closing my coat and making sure the zippered slit covering my holster was open and accessible. "Be careful, Jackson Turner. I feel some darkness in the air." I just gave a tight-lipped nod before opening the door and stepping out into the wind. The icy chill hit me immediately, cutting through my heavy pants and finding its way through every little opening in my clothing. The wind out here was a constant buffeting and howled in my ears. The snow along the trail was only a little over ankle deep, but tugged at my boots with every step, slowing my progress. The area that Martin had described was one of the few marked campsites along this area of the trail, and though it wasn't strictly required for campers to check in before setting up, it was highly encouraged. This deep in the woods, 20 miles away from the nearest town, the only real lifeline that anyone had were the rangers. If anything went wrong out here, the fact that you registered with the local ranger station may very well mean the difference between life and death. That didn't mean that everyone followed that rule, though. Most of the time it was new campers, those folks lacking some of the wisdom of experience that didn't know or didn't think it necessary to check in before setting camp. Sometimes it was the opposite. Some highly experienced outdoors folks felt that there was no need, that they could handle anything that came their way. Either way, as I followed that northern trail, a growing unease began to color my steps. I felt the tight grip of anxiousness tickling my every breath. I didn't know what I was going to find. If I was lucky, I'd find 3 cold weather, double-wall silicone nylon tents with their occupants snuggled warmly and safely within. If that was the case, I'd just check on them and turn back to my station, hopefully before the worst of the storm began in earnest. If not, well, I'd have to figure that out when it came. A half hour later, I reached the campsite, or at least what was left of it. The remains of what were obviously 3 high-quality winter tents were positioned compactly around a central fire pit, their bright red material shredded and torn and flapping violently in the fierce wind, looking very much like a lunatic array of flags in the heart of a hurricane. I pulled the ears of my hat lower, adjusting the chin strap tighter. "Hello?" I shouted, straining to make my voice carry above the wind. Even with all my force, it still sounded pathetically impotent in the roar of the coming storm. Is anyone here? I waited a long moment, but could hear nothing but the rush of wind and the whip-like snapping of the nylon fabric. The campsite had all the hallmarks of a bear attack, except I hadn't seen a bear in months, and we'd never had a bear attack in this area that I'd ever heard of. It wasn't like the forests out west. We didn't have brown bears here. Black bears, yeah, but they were smaller and nowhere near as aggressive as big browns. Sure, they could be dangerous, especially if startled or threatened, but they didn't actively hunt humans. I took a few more steps forward into the campsite, drawing the Sig Sauer 10mm and holding it at low ready as I performed a quick visual of the tents. Nothing. No signs of bodies, blood, a struggle, anything at all. Just destroyed tents that could have been abandoned by the campers when the wind started getting bad and the fabric started to fail. And then it caught my eye. A flash of dark gray, partially hidden by the snow between two of the tents. Another 10 minutes of snowfall and I'd have never seen it. Moving closer, I towed the frozen bundle of cloth, overturning it before picking it up with my free hand, keeping the Sig at the ready. It was a pair of thick winter pants, old and torn and covered in dark red-brown stains that looked too fresh for my comfort. They were fur-lined and looked to be woolen. As soon as I lifted them free of the snow, the wind blew a familiar musky smell into my face, and I dropped them in revulsion. Another 2 feet beyond, the hint of blue in the white drift drew my attention, and I cautiously approached. I recognized the puffy material of a cold-weather jacket, and when I reached out to expose more of it, I staggered backwards in shock, realizing suddenly that I was looking at a crudely dismembered arm, still wrapped snugly in its warm jacket sleeve. I cursed aloud and stumbled backwards, tripping over the stones surrounding the fire pit and falling hard on my ass, eyes wide and not even registering the pain of my tailbone meeting the frozen ground. I sat there hyperventilating for what felt like minutes, long enough that the frigid chill was settling into my legs and backside from where I sat dumbly in the snow, eyes wide and breath ragged. It was only when my arms began to shake that I realized I was gripping the handgun as tightly as I could, aimed insanely at the gray mass of frozen trousers on the ground before me, as if they were going to suddenly spring to life and attack. Shit, was all I could think to say as rationality suddenly returned, clearing the pulsating red spots from my vision and slamming my thoughts back to the present jarringly. The pounding in my ears began to lessen, replaced once again with the unrelenting wail of the wind. I leapt to my feet and started running back along the trail, back to my station, where Martin and Lucas and Diego and Sophia and the other girl, whose name I couldn't remember, sheltered from the coming storm with what? Was he some sort of psycho serial killer, stalking the lonely hiking trails of upstate New York? That didn't make any sense. I'd been here for 3 years and never heard of anything like this. As I ran clumsily through the snow, which was now halfway up my shin, I thought back to those gray pants, discarded in the campsite. They had been shredded, not just torn and ripped from age and wear. It had been something violent that caused the damage, and the bloodstains seemed to lend credence to that theory. So whatever had happened, the stranger had decided to replace his damaged and stained pants with what? Those of his victims. And then I thought about how none of his clothes matched, and how his boots and gloves weren't even suitable for winter weather. How long had this been going on? 20 minutes later, the dim yellow lights from the windows of my station appeared suddenly from the nearly white-out conditions that had overtaken me with the full coming of the storm. The temperature had dropped even more, and I was amazed that I had been able to keep up my pace long enough to make it back. Driven by adrenaline and fear, I slowed to a halt before my ranger station, noticing immediately how the front door hung open a few inches. My mind urged me forward to go racing in, but I had to take a few moments to catch my breath and let my racing heart slow a bit before I entered. I couldn't understand why the door was only open a few finger widths. If it hadn't been locked, the first strong gust of wind would have blown it fully open and sent it banging against the wood paneling of the wall behind it. But what occupied my thoughts far more was the implication of that open door. There's no way it could have been missed by anyone within, and nobody in their right mind would have sat in the station while the freezing wind and snow blew in through the open doorway. I pushed that, though, aside and crept as quietly as possible to the door, pushing it gently at first, then with greater force as I felt some resistance holding it closed. I gripped my sidearm tightly, muzzle directly forward and at chest level, finger resting along the frame of the pistol and ready to drop to the trigger and go to work in a moment's notice. The door gradually gave way and pushed inward far enough that I was able to slide through the gap, the howling of the wind and the protesting of the building, blessedly providing enough cacophony to cover the sounds of my entrance. As soon as I stepped inside, I found myself in the center of a fever nightmare. A body lay behind the door and had served as an impromptu barricade. I could only tell that it was one of the women by the delicate shape of the body, as the head and upper torso had been savagely mutilated, the skin and scalp torn away from the red white of the skull viciously, presumably while she had desperately tried to make her escape from whatever hell had pursued her. Blood slicked nearly every surface around me, hot and stinking of copper, and I became aware of a wet, tearing sound emanating from the bunk room. The lights in that room were flickering chaotically, the hanging bulb in the center of the room swinging maniacally, as if it had been recently struck and was still settling its pendulum motion. As quietly as I could, I ducked around the doorway into the room, fresh shock coursing through my body in a cold wash that threatened my consciousness. Bodies and pieces of bodies lay strewn about the room haphazardly, most still enshrouded in bits of clothing, now tacked in place by sticky crimson. I could feel the heat in the room from whatever horrifying act of violence had occurred, from the bodies that now lay scattered about like discarded playthings. At my feet, I noted a handful of empty shotgun shells, where they had fallen and been arrested by the viscous gore that painted the wooden floorboards. The shotgun lay nearby, chamber open and magazine tube empty, only inches away from the barely recognizable remains of the man I'd known as Martin. Terrible slashes and wounds covered his ravaged corpse, looking as if he'd been thrown into a shredder. His limbs were outstretched and only attached by the yellowish tendons and pink muscles which now lay open and exposed. My eyes were drawn at that moment to the source of the sounds I'd heard before, and I saw the crouched form of the stranger straddling one of the bodies. Lucas, I think, by the bright yellow of his North Face jacket. I watched in horror as the stranger dipped his head again and again, jerking it savagely each time it came away, as if tearing away more bits of meat with each movement. I noticed then that the stranger's hands had somehow grown, elongated, and taken on a shiny chitinous appearance that left the fingers as jagged and gore-encrusted claws. After only a moment's shocked hesitation, my reflexes took over and I snapped the muzzle of my handgun up and squeezed the trigger. I know that the thunderous blasts of the 10mm must have been deafening, but I barely registered it as I watched blackened holes appear in the thing's back. It threw its head back in what I can only hope was pain, and cried out in a shrieking screech that drowned out all else. I squeezed the trigger again, and another bullet punched its way through the horrifying thing. Suddenly, almost faster than I could track, the stranger exploded up from where it had been feasting and lit upon the wall, its terrible claws sinking into the wood and holding it in place as it turned its head 180 degrees to face me. The eyes had turned completely black and grown to the size of golf balls, and the jaw looked almost to have disjointed from its skull, the skin at the corners of its mouth drawn back in a hideous grin that stretched nearly from ear to ear, exposing a mouthful of shark-like triangular teeth, now stained bright red. It tensed, and an instant later it had leapt to the next wall, gripping the exposed wood like some monstrous insect, eyes fixed upon me. Before it could make another move, I fired again and again and again. My panic-induced attack miraculously finding purchase more often than not as empty brass cases ejected against the doorframe next to me, ringing out like death bells. Then there was a long moment of silent stillness in the room, and its black eyes were fixed on me, still unnervingly cold and alien. I tensed, waiting for the thing to pounce towards me, but it was clear I'd hurt it. I don't know how badly, but black ichor dripped from the half-dozen wounds punched by my hollow points, and I thought I heard a sickly rattling in its slow, deep breaths. With a final ear-splitting, otherworldly shriek, it leapt again, this time away from me and through the window at the rear of the room. The glass shattered outward, and then it was over. I stood alone in this charnel house, left only with the remains of the 5 Spanish tourists and the disconcerting awareness that the slide of my handgun was locked back, smoke lazily drifting from the barrel and the magazine now empty. That was almost a year ago, and I've since transferred from field operations to an administrative position within the Park Service. My office is located in the middle of a city, surrounded by people and without a lonely forest or dark wilderness in sight. After the investigation died down and the deaths were ruled as animal predation, I tried to return to my posting, but I just couldn't do it. They tore down the old station and built a new one closer to the trailhead, and I thought I could get past it, but I kept seeing that stranger, that creature, every time I closed my eyes. A few times in the dark stillness of the night, I thought I could hear that banshee wail echoing in the distance. Once or twice I think I heard more than one. I slept with my handgun on the nightstand and the shotgun propped next to my bed, and kept the doors locked at all times. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, maybe searching for me. Maybe it needed to make sure that I wasn't able to tell anyone about it. You see, in the time since that horrible night, I've scoured the internet for any possible explanation for what I saw. I consulted any self-proclaimed cryptozoologist or paranormal investigator that would speak to me, but nobody had any rational explanations beyond fairy tales and urban legends, and invariably I was left with as many questions as I started with. And then I tripped across an article one day that changed everything for me. It was a piece written about something called the Uncanny Valley, an idea put forth by some Japanese roboticist back in the 70s. At first, I almost passed it over, since it seemed mostly to relate to robots and computer graphics and how people feel increasingly uncomfortable the more realistically human they appear. But then I read a theory about why people may react this way, and how it may be an evolutionary artifact left over in the dark corners of our reptilian brains, about how at some point in our distant shared racial history, there may have actually been predators that looked almost human. They may have appeared so close to our ancestors that they were able to blend in with us almost perfectly. According to the theory, primitive humans may have developed a keen sense of facial recognition as a survival mechanism. This may have been passed down through genetic memories, fading just a little with each generation until today, where it existed as little more than an instinctive warning when we looked at someone who wasn't quite right, someone who seemed almost normal, but perhaps with the slightest of imperfections that made them seem just a little wrong, someone that our instincts told us didn't belong, someone who wasn't really one of us at all. I wondered if these things have been with us all along, hiding among us, stalking us from within our own numbers. Yesterday, on my commute to the office, I noticed a young woman sitting by herself in the back of the subway car. Even though it was crowded, the seats beside her were empty, and I noticed that the other commuters almost seemed to be avoiding getting too close to her. I don't think anyone really realized it, but people kept glancing uneasily at her out of the corners of their eyes. There was nothing overtly out of place with her, and it could have just been happenstance that nobody had elected to sit down next to her. I just couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something just felt off.